G'day listeners, Sammy Gordon here from Australian Property Scout. If you're loving all the property investment content over here at SBI, you will love the Scouting Australia podcast. Hosted by myself alongside my good mate and experienced investor Jimmy Ibrahim, we unpack everything from real investor stories, mindset hacks, and a massive amount of property investment strategies and much, much more. Check us out over at the Scouting Australia podcast and take your investing to a new level.
This is a Momentum Media production.
Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show, the podcast by investors for investors.
Hi, good everyone. How you going? Phil Tarrant. I'm the host of the Smart Property Investment Show, stumbling my way through my introduction. As I do stumbling my way through property investment, I've been the first to say that I don't always get it right. That's why I surround myself with a whole bunch of people that typically know what they're doing. One of them is my mortgage broker. They certainly know what they're doing, and I've just gone through a whole pathway of refinancing a whole bunch of my investment properties, which I've been sharing on the Smart Property Investment Show. That is now to an end, and I reckon my mortgage broker is celebrating the fact because I'm not necessarily the easiest client to work with. It's very complicated, and it's going to sound like real first world problems. It gets quite complicated financing when you have a lot of properties and in certain sort of structures. So not your sort of standard setup, but for many property investors, for those that tune into this show, there's probably a setup they're familiar with property sitting inside of trusts and multiple properties inside of trusts and sort of a diversified portfolio. So it can be a hassle, a struggle, painful sometimes as a property investor getting finance, but we all know that finance is central to property investment. You need to make sure you got the right broker. The broker I use is called Finni Mortgages. I speak about them all the time. I reckon they're pretty good, so good that I actually invested in them. They do a good job, and I do a regular podcast with their senior broker who runs their broker operations over there, Loisance. And I got heckled the other day. Someone asked me, say a name properly, Phil, say a name. Eva, how are you going? It's really funny. It's become a thing. I'm mocked and ridiculed wherever I go these days.
Yeah, maybe I should say my name. I should say, hi, I'm Eva Loisance.
Loisance, that's what I said.
From Finni Mortgages, yeah.
Well, you've been doing this podcast now with me for quite some time. We've covered a lot of stuff, and we get some really good feedback. Sometimes people go, oh, it's a bit too basic, Phil. Look, yeah, we know all that stuff. Can you get into the more sophisticated stuff? And we cover that stuff as well. But we understand and we appreciate that property investment is broad church. We have people who are just starting off in property investment. We have other people who have very large portfolios. So we chat with and connect with everyone and sundry. And even for those people who are a little bit further advanced on their property investment journey, it's okay to refresh yourself with the basics, and particularly around finance. If you get that right, it's good. I've been sharing my own pathway, sort of getting finance recently and now going through the process of fixed rates coming off into variable and getting annoyed with lenders and having to get stuck into what is sometimes tiresome and hard work, working with banks to get your loans repriced or into competitive positions. So as we go through a pathway of stability with interest rates, with a view towards interest rates coming down towards the back end of the year, you're going to have to put the hard work in. It's simple and easy. Don't sit around and complain about it. Lenders might not necessarily pass on rates as fast as you would like them to. You're going to have to get on the phone. Don't expect they're going to be passing on interest rates directly to you at the same amount as what the RBA comes out. Some lenders will, some lenders won't. So you're going to have to get ready for a bit of fight and a bit of friction, but that's the way you do it. But getting back to basics, Eva, we haven't really spoken about valuations very often, and valuations can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. It is the key. It's a key
and
to
it's
the city.
It's not so basic. And I can tell you, Phil, there's a lot of people that think they know about valuation and how it works. But really, it's missing a lot of knowledge out there. It's quite tricky. And I think people get emotional when it's their home, or they have no idea when it's their investment property, what it's worth. They don't know what value is used to put a number on their property. And I think that's why I actually want to chat about this today and bring an expert in to really give us the answer.
Yeah, and the answer is, well, it depends. Sometimes valuation is a little bit grey any given day. One on the same day, two different valuers can have two very different conclusions for the value of a property, and it's bonkers how it happens sometimes. Most people will be familiar with valuations because at a point in time through the financing process, a bank, if you just secured a property, a bank will get a valuer to value the property depending on the sophistication of that property or the complexity of that property. Sometimes a lender will be happy with a a desktop valuation or an automated valuation where they put some information into a machine and the machine will tell you what the estimated value is. And you see that happen often in areas with a lot of properties which are very similar, in big suburbs where there's a lot of transactions. So there's a level of confidence around value. But then at other times with certain premises, banks will actually send valuers out to eyeball the property and do their own assessment on it. So it's all varied. And there's different tools and utilities that most people will have a valuer for that purpose, but smart investors I know, myself included, use valuers for other purposes outside of the financing purpose. We're going to have a chat also about that today. Joining me in the studio, Gareth Woodham. He's from a company called Augmen Consulting. I've used Augmen myself to do a valuation on an off-market transaction I've done to give me confidence to negotiate on the purchase price. We can have a chat about that. But Gareth, how are you going? You well?
I'm well, Phil. How are you?
I am good. Do you like valuing properties?
I enjoy valuing properties. I wouldn't be doing it for this long if I didn't.
Well, that's important. You've got to enjoy your job. And I do know also, as part of being I guess you're a licensed valuer. Is that the right term?
Certified practising valuer. So
okay.
like a CPA, but a CPV.
Okay. As certified practising valuer, you're also a buyer's agent. I'll have a chat with you at some other point around being a buyer's agent, because I know you do both, but valuations is very much a key focus of a lot of the work that you do. How did you end up being a property valuer?
Well, bit of a long story, but I was having a chat with my dad while I was in year 11, and he said, what do you want to do when you finish school? I said, I want to go to uni and earn good money. And he said, there's this great new course. This is back in maybe the late 1980s. And he said, there's this great course. You can be a speech pathologist. There's no speech pathologist. You'd be a speech pathologist. You make a fortune. I said, no, I'm not interested in that, Dad. And he said, well, there's this other course. It's called land economics. It's a brand new course. It's come out at UTS. Maybe you should look into that. And so I said, okay, sounds interesting. It's all about property. And I just went into that, and I did a property degree at UTS. I graduated in 1999, and I became a registered valuer shortly thereafterwards. I got a job straight away. I was offered a job straight away, and I've been as a property valuer in Sydney and Melbourne. Back in Sydney since then, doing mortgage valuations for about 15 or 16 years. And then since then, I've moved into private practice, specialising in family law, accounting, compliance, audit, litigation for all sorts of interesting reasons. So that's the short précis of it all. So you essentially learned your craft valuing properties for the purpose of mortgages, then you moved into a more specialised discipline where there would be a divorce of some sort and there'd be an argument about how much a property is worth because someone wants to get their percentage of it. Then you would go in there and say, it's actually worth this much money. Yep. In those cases, you're interestingly, when you're doing it for family law, it's quite unique. You get instructed by both sides. So the lawyer for the husband and the lawyer for the wife both jointly instruct you, and you report back to the court. And so therefore the valuation of the property becomes a matter of fact, and then they can bicker about the percentages that they're getting out of it afterwards. But you're actually working for both sides and the court in those matters. It's not adversarial approach that you do in other.
I imagine you need a fair degree of professional discipline with that, because some side would be saying, make it really, really low, and the other side would be saying, make it really, really high. Then you've got to sit in the middle as an impartial.
Often they're both in the house at the same time that I am.
Yeah, okay. and you must get some pretty big discrepancies on what people think stuff's worth.
Oh, all the time. I used to see it a lot. You see more of it in the mortgage work, and it used to be a bit more prevalent in the early 2000s when there was, I think it was a function of the growing broker market where people were moving away from going directly with banks, and the whole broker industry was sort of blossoming, and it was very much favoured with upfront commissions. And so there was a lot of motivation to do high loan amounts to people for whatever purpose, and because a high loan amount meant a high commission, and so they would edge their estimate of value up a little bit higher just because every $100,000 would pay another $2,000 commission.
Well, thankfully, those sort of habits of behaviours don't happen anymore.
As far as I'm aware, those sort of
they're long gone. And to be fair, 25 years ago, mortgage broking was a little bit of the Wild West. It's very regulated these days. Very regulated.
Wild West, and it's far more regulated. It's a much safer place for consumers, but it's also a much safer place for mortgage brokers now, because they know that they're not competing with cowboys, and they don't have to go up against someone who's got far less scruples than a used car salesman.
Yeah, well, there's good reason why now 70% of new mortgages are done through mortgage brokers. They're an important part of the ecosystem. And they're critical. And I'm obviously going to talk favourably about mortgage brokers. I've got Eva tuning in here. I also get heckled about you know,
I don't want to swearing at me in French.
being a big advocate and ambassador for mortgage brokers, they do a great job. But
Yeah.
I want to sort of get some nuts and bolts stuff around
Sure.
valuations. Has the game changed that much before we go there? Like I know there's like AVMs now, automated valuation. What's the M stand for?
Absolutely, Phil. So in the mortgage industry, the whole landscape has changed incredibly for property valuation. And so before I even started, when I was at university, they had a schedule of fees, and it was set fees that you pay to value vacant land, to value a single dwelling house and a unit and so forth. And it was just a completely regulated market. That was deregulated while I was at uni. So when I started, it wasn't set fees, but it was very much it supported boutique valuation firms, because you would be doing mortgage valuations, but you could work for a small firm. Might have 5 or 6 staff, and you would concentrate on a patch of Sydney, and you would pitch your services to your local bank. So you'd have your St George Bank and your Westpac Bank and your CBA and just your local branches, and you'd pitch your work to them. You would have to demonstrate your ability to and your competence and be allowed on the panel. They would support a lot of small businesses in that way, and you would do valuation for your local branches and so forth. And it would all be done. I remember you go into work in the morning, you go into the office and pick up your jobs. You would ring the people and say, look, I've been told to come and do a valuation. Can I come today? Hopefully. I'll be at this time. You'd make an appointment. You drive out there. You'd look at the property, take your measurements with your measuring tape, take some photographs with your, at that time we did have digital cameras, but some people were still using film cameras. And you would come back to the office, you would do your research, you'd write up your report, and you give it to someone in the typing pool to type it up. And that would get typed up overnight. And then in the morning, you'd come in, and the first thing you'd do would check your reports from the day before that they were what you'd written and sign it, and it would go off. If you did have to wait for photos to be developed, there could be another couple of hours waiting for those to be stuck into the report. At capacity, doing that sort of work, you could really tear through 4 or 5 mortgage valuations in a day, hit all your targets and make everyone really happy. And now we've moved on with RP data, being able to capture a lot of the more of the intricate data about properties through having the Valex feed them the information. They've developed some pretty sharp automated valuation models, and there are other competitors out there that do that as well, that can give a reasonably good estimate on homogenous type properties. So if you're in a relatively new housing estate and you've got regular sized blocks of land and pretty regular shaped dwellings with regular levels of finish, then that lends itself to good, very accurate sort of automated valuations. The next level down, they'll have desktop valuations where, because we've got such good tools with Google Street View and Near Maps and all of the access to all of your sales data online, you don't have to. That was the other thing we used to do. We used to collect the newspaper on Sunday, and it'd have the auction results from the Saturday in the newspaper, and you keep them in your folder in your car. So when you're driving around, you could look at all the properties that are sold the weekend before, and that was your primary data. Now it's all available online, and they can use that even for desktop valuations. Valuers don't need to visit the property. They can ask a few questions over the phone. What's the internal, how many bedrooms, how many living areas? They can get a rough idea of the area of the dwelling from an aerial photograph and using some aerial measurements in that way, but get a feel for the inside of the property and give a reasonably accurate assessment as to what the value of the property might be for lending purposes. And obviously that also has to coincide with a lower risk lending position. So typically 80% or lower loan to value ratio, and in sort of good, when I say good, postcodes and areas where there are no other sort of lending restrictions. You still need to be dealing with valuers that are familiar with the area. It's very difficult to do a desktop assessment of a property in a different state when you don't know the lay of the land in that suburb or that city, and you don't know what factors really drive the market in those locations and what proximity to aircraft noise or busy roads or the right schools and such, that you do need to have experience to be able to make those assessments. But yeah, there's plenty of other tools that can be used for mortgage valuations before you get to a formal internal valuation of the property where the valuer visits the property, measures it up. They do have a laser measurer now instead of a measuring tape or a measuring wheel, but they'll measure the property, get a good idea of the area, the layout of the rooms, make sure the property flows well, or if it doesn't, be able to use that in their assessment of whether the property, where it would be positioned in the current market in that location. And that's done by analysing recent sales evidence and seeing how that property positions relative to those other recent sales.
So the more homogenous type properties, and you spoke about them, why do banks require evaluation of the property? The reason why is that if they're issuing debt against it, they need to know that the value of the property is pretty consistent with what the purchase price is, and it gives them confidence around issuing that debt at a certain LVR level. It's pretty straightforward. Most of the time, either valuations stack up to contract prices. Do you find many discrepancies around that? I'm just talking about pretty meat and potatoes type properties. It depends on the market.
Yeah, for purchase, it's 90% of the time it will be whatever the client paid for. And they very rarely would go over what the contract price is. Yeah, I guess there's a risk there. I don't know, Gareth. Or
yeah, the only issue that you ever saw, and when I had a team of valuers doing mortgage valuation work, you have caution around off the plan purchases because they've been purchased in a different market. They could have been purchased 2 years ago in a different state where people have no understanding of the market in that location. And so in the worst instance, you do get that two-tier marketing where they're sold to interstate investors at a different price to what they're actually selling to locals for. But if a property has sold at auction, you have a fairly good definition of market value being willing buyer, willing seller in an arm's length transaction when you're cognizant of all factors affecting that property. That's what an auction is. If you buy a property off market, you may not be able to meet the definition of willing or parties having full access to knowledge, but you're still unlikely, if you're buying property off market and you're astute enough to be in that activity and typically working with a buyer's agent for that, you would be aware of the market that you're operating in. You wouldn't go buying a property off market in a market that you're completely unfamiliar with and therefore pay an unrealistic figure for that. So typically, if a property has been transacted in a market transaction or an off-market transaction, but where there are real estate agents involved, it usually meets the definition. And it would be very, very hard to argue from a valuer's perspective that they believe that the property is worth a different amount to what the contract price is, unless there's something unusual like a furniture package. You cannot say that the purchase price is equivalent if it includes $50,000 worth of furniture, because there you've got $50,000 worth of furniture front and center on the contract. You've got to exclude that. But if it was a property that's advertised for sale or you bought it through a normal transaction, that is it's a definition market price.
Yeah, and the point around disparity between the purchase price, contract price, and the actual price, a lot of property investors will say, well, I bought this property $50,000 under market value, but the price on the contract is what you paid for it, and that will typically be what the bank will value it at. So most of the time, that's just, paper money, which potentially might have some utility if you're able to get the property revalued at a point of time with that in mind, with the purpose of refinancing. But
it would be interesting to value a property at $50,000 more than what it's worth at a short point in time afterwards, because if a valuer does not see what the purchase price was when they're doing their investigation about the property, they're being completely negligent. And for them to suggest that the property has increased in value from a market transaction in the blink of an eye, that would be difficult to quantify. But if time had passed and the market demonstrated it and all the sales evidence was to suggest that, then in a rising market or a falling market, you can have significant changes in a period of 3 months, and that is reasonably easy to justify. The key thing here for mortgage valuations is a valuer is required to rely upon settled sales. So that evidence typically lags by the time it's just settled, the transaction is settled, and that is reported back to a commercially reliable database. You're looking at a minimum of 6 weeks and typically 3 months. So you're using 3-month-old data. So in a rapidly rising market, a valuer is a little bit restrained in what they can use for evidence. And likewise, in a falling market, they may be relying on older evidence that doesn't reflect the true market today when you're doing mortgage valuations, because that's one of the requirements, and it's the agreement between the lenders and the panel valuers, is that they need to use settled sales. And that can be a big disparity when you go, the house next door sold last weekend for $1.4 million. Why would you value this at $1.3 million? So, well, 3 months ago, everything was selling at $1.3 million. So you can use that and comment on it, but typically mortgage valuations require settled sales as their primary evidence.
It's complicated. And this is when you find yourself in positions where you're saying, well, I pay 1.4, you've got it at 1.3. I need to find another $100,000 somewhere because the lender will only do it based on the valuation. But, that's a bit technical.
Like I said, unless you bought that, very unmarket-like transaction, it'd be very hard for a decent valuer. Even if you bought the most expensive house in the suburb, and the next most valuable house was $100,000 or $500,000 less, you're able to demonstrate that you've achieved market value. When you're talking about valuing prestige homes in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, for example, you got $50 million. Well, of course, you don't have rows of $50 million houses that have sold last week and the week before and so forth. But you still need to approach that and look at the market for that sort of property, the type of buyer activity in that market, and recent transactions and the nature of that sale. Was it sold in a bit hush-hush, or was it a divorce matter or a liquidation matter? Those things happen on high-value property.
And this is where it sort of gets a little bit grayer. The more expensive the property and the complexity of the property, the difference it gets, and that's the skill of value. So
and that requires a far higher level of skill and research and a lot more time and such to go into those sort of jobs.
Yeah, let's have a chat how you actually work out the valuation of something. The point I would make beforehand is if you are buying something which isn't a completely disconnected transaction at auction or through a standard sales process, say it's via some non-listed property or off-market property and or using a buyer's agent and or it's something which is of significant value, you need to make sure at the point of negotiation that you're very aware of what the price point is, because that will what the valuation is, because that will set how you negotiate with a view towards getting debt in the future. And I've done that in the past, and I've used Gareth's firm, Augmen Consulting, to do that, where before I contracted on a property, I had a question mark around it. I want to be very certain on what the valuation was. So I bought Gareth and his firm in to actually do that for me, which helped me actually negotiate with confidence. But again, that's one use of it. Let's go to a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about what makes up a valuation. Back in a moment.
Are you looking to invest for a big return, but are unsure which suburb is up and coming and guaranteed to give you the most bang for your buck? Smart Property Investment and Pure Property Investment have unveiled the Fast 50 report for 2025, identifying the suburbs backed by research that are giving investors the highest returns. Don't make any investing decisions until you read the free report. Visit smartpropertyinvestment.com.au to download the report.
And welcome back. Phil Tarrant for Smart Property Investment. I'm having a chat with Gareth Woodham from Augmen Consulting, and during my regular conversation with Loisance from Finni Mortgages, talking about valuation. Now, Gareth, what's considered when you determine a value of a property?
Okay, I assume that we're talking about residential property here, Phil.
Resi property, not commercial. And then let's talk about the sort of properties that the majority of property investors would be buying.
So property investors typically buy single unit residential properties. When I say unit, I mean they're just a single dwelling house or a single apartment. There's been a movement over the last sort of 5 or 6 years for less sophisticated investors to move into more straightforward commercial properties. But typically, and in my experience over the last decade of working with investors, 90% of them have been buying residential properties, and they're looking at it just usually as a buy and hold. So they're looking for something that doesn't require redevelopment or such, not a great deal of renovation. So just single dwellings, single units. When you're valuing a property like that, the way that it is conducted on a single residential dwelling is through direct comparison. That's the process that you use. And by the nature of the term, it's by comparing the property you're valuing to other properties that have recently sold in the same market. So you look at nearby transactions over the last 3 to 6 months for similar type property. So if you're looking at a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house on 600 square metres of land, you'd be looking for other 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, ideally, but you might consider a 4-bedroom house as part of your evidence, and then just say, well, it's got to be a bit less than that one. And you might look at 2-bedroom houses and say, well, it's got to be a little bit more than that. But you have a whole matrix going of how many, the quality of the dwelling, the level of accommodation, the size of the land, the aspect, the views. So you look at all these factors and place your property that you're valuing within the market of all the recent sales. So if you've got sales from $1 million to $1.3 million, and they go from a 2-bedroom shack on 400 metres to 4-bedroom house on 650 square metres, and yours is a 3-bedroom, nice, neat 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom on 600 square metres, you know that it would be somewhere leaning to the higher end of that range. It won't be on either side of that range unless there's something dramatically different, like it's backing onto an airport or something, or looking out over to the ocean. So it's about looking at recent transactions in the market and seeing where your property places amongst those and doing your best you can to do like for like, which is the big thing in property, residential property. No two properties are the same. That's why I really enjoy it. It's very hard to have a boring day as a property value. You're always looking at different properties and they're usually occupied by very different people. So there's always plenty of stories to tell there. But the point is properties are always different. So it's about trying to place your property within the market of recent transactions. That's the core of it. You need to look at, in order to do that, then you've got to analyse the land size, the zoning, the shape of the land, the topography of it, school zones and transport, proximity to services and amenities, and likely changes to the status quo. Is there going to be apartments built nearby? Will there be an extension to the highway to make it wider and resume some property nearby that might adversely affect yours? So looking at all those factors, but the key is to place your property within a market of recent sales.
And for the purpose of valuations, do you take into consideration zoning, even though the asset hasn't been developed? And what I'm thinking there is that if you buy an old 2-bedroom place on a R4 zone block, do you take the potential of that asset into consideration when you look at the valuation?
Absolutely, Phil. So that's when you go on a different approach. So the example you gave me of a 2-bedroom house on an R4 block, let's say it's like 1,200 square metres of land, you would have to do that. That one of the key requirements of property valuation is that you have to value it at its highest and best use. And so the highest and best use for a property of 1,200 square metres in R4 zoning is not to have a 2-bedroom house on it. It is likely to have a block of flats on it. I'm assuming all other things are equal. So you would need to value that as if it was a development site. And there's a couple of approaches you can do that. If there's been a lot of transactions of development sites nearby, you could go the direct comparison approach and look at it just on a rate per square metre for the land by analysing recent sales of development sites, how much people are paying per square metre of those, apply that to your property and virtually ignore the improvements that are on it. Otherwise, if it is unique in its location, you would need to do a hypothetical development, which is it's reverse engineering a development. You look at it as if your maximum you could build on it. You'd study the LEP and the DCP. You would see your maximum allowable gross floor area would be such and such. You could have 5,000 square metres of apartments on it, of living area, and so you would work out what that would look like. You could possibly put 60 apartments on it. You work out those 2-bedroom apartments would transact for $700,000 each. You get your gross realisation, 60 apartments times $700,000, and then you deduct back all your costs to do that. And this is a very challenging exercise, and it's relying on gathering information on construction costs, holding costs, the taxes and duties that you're going to have to pay to hold that. Your land tax will be clicking over, your interest will be clicking over. You deduct all of those, and it comes back to you what's known as your residual land value. And so that is what the value of that property would be when you look at it as its highest and best use. It is much more involved. It's a very difficult exercise, and it is better when you have some good information to go with that, such as a DA, which would say this is what you're actually allowed to put on this, not speculating, and a quantity surveyor's report, which would cost the construction of that down to the dollar. They put all the nuts and bolts in that so that you use those construction costs, and you can do a relatively simple feasibility analysis on that, so hypothetical development on that. If you wanted to get into more detailed study, which is beyond the scope of anything any customers we'll be talking about today, but if you're looking at a project that goes over several years in several stages, then you've got to cost that month by month and do a cash flow analysis and net present value, all of that to get your residual land value, which is a bit more in depth, and probably I don't think I'm insured for that.
Yeah, God. Well, I've just realised, Eva, there's no way in the world we're going to be able to get through everything we want to get to today with Gareth. I think we're going to have to get him back on around valuations. There's about 1,000 questions I want to ask.
There's a lot, yeah.
There is a lot, and we want to get sort of quite tactical with it. So this is more of an introduction to valuation. We'll just go another break, but when we come back, Gareth, I just want to hit with a whole bunch of real quick questions. So stay with us, everyone. Back in a moment. Welcome back, Phil Tarrant. I'm chatting with Gareth from Augmen Consulting, Eva, Finni Mortgages. And sorry, Eva, I'm sort of dominating this conversation, so if you don't mind.
No, that's all good.
In the background. The important point for mortgage brokers when it comes to valuations is that most people are just satisfied the valuation come in at what it is. That means finance can progress, and that's the way it should be working. The other flip side is that when you're looking to refinance property, your mortgage broker will typically say to the lenders what the perceived valuation of those assets are. And it's quite good to get that right. So make sure when you're working with your mortgage broker, if you are going for a refinance, you may have had a property for 2, 3 years, 5 years, whatever. You should be able to work out largely, if it's a homogenous type property, what the valuation of it is. So your broker can make a recommendation to the lender around what that is. On the flip side, though, if there's a question mark around it, or you feel as though you'd like more of an accurate valuation with it, is when you would engage a valuation. I've done that in the past, particularly when I've renovated properties, and I might have done a reno sort of 6 months, period of 6 months after it's been done, completely transformed it. I remember one in particular. I bought the place in Cambridge Park out in near Penrith in the western suburbs of Sydney for $212,000. The bank deemed it uninhabitable. They would only give me a valuation on it, which was the land value. I did a big reno on it. I think I spent about, well, back then it was big reno, spent about $48,000 on it, get it revalued, I think 6 months later, for close to $500,000. So I had to actually give good cause for the valuation difference. It actually met the value on site. And whether or not you like this sort of tough, Gareth, pretty much going, hey, here's all the before and after photos. Look at this great job. And I was actually able to take them through the journey of why the valuation had changed so much. Is that okay to do?
Look, notwithstanding the fact that residential property valuers for mortgages now rip through possibly 10 or more valuations a day, so they don't have a lot of time. But if you've got something that's worth mentioning, like your example there, Phil, yes, I would absolutely say, because if he's doing his job, he would say, this was purchased a year ago for 200, why is it worth 500? I'll need to find that out. If you can say, look, just so you know, did a full renovation, bought it cheap, spent all this money on it, and that's why we're looking at this. So you're definitely not telling them how to do their job, but you're giving them some information on why the expectation is that it would not be just above what it was before, just to suggest normal market movement. But no, that's fine.
And some other valuers have where I've bought sort of more expensive real estate for the purpose of property investment, where I've got sort of my own sort of QS reports on it, and pretty much gone, hey, Mr. Valuer, I've got this detailed QS report, which gives you a sense for the improvements on the property, so the building, and they were like, leave me alone. I want anything to do with the old value based on what I think the valuation is.
Yeah. So one of the things that you have to understand for mortgage valuations, cost doesn't equal value. It's not an insurance valuation. So it is where the property would sit within the market. So you can leave it up to the valuer to make up their own mind about the quality of finish. If they know what they're doing, they will be able to tell the difference between a $15,000 kitchen and a $50,000 kitchen. So there's no point in giving them the receipts for that. That's why they do things like take down the brand names of all the appliances when they're walking through the house, to make sure that they're getting a feel for the level of quality. But you don't need to provide the receipts as such. But it is, if there have been significant changes, that's worth mentioning.
This value was pretty short with me. Pretty much go, just leave me alone, mate. I don't want to talk to you. So
Mate,
sure, no problem.
Valuers, believe it or not, valuers are all people.
Really?
So they have good days and they have bad days.
So one of the questions then, very quickly, Gareth, how can two valuers get two completely different valuations on a property if they look at it the same day or same week?
Look, valuers values are people. So valuers can get things wrong. That's my first thing. I'm not saying valuers are perfect, but if a valuer does their job properly, they should be within a pretty close range of each other, unless it is a very obscure and interesting type of property. You would be relying on the same evidence. Hopefully, they've both done their job. The evidence isn't just sitting there. You've got to go and find it. So they've both done their job and they've found the right evidence that aligns with that property. They've made a qualitative assessment of your property and where it would lie within that evidence. And then it's just a case of putting a number on where that sits. So there shouldn't be a great discrepancy in the value. Like, it is always very exciting when you do a valuation for a property and it goes to auction in the next 2 or 3 months. Yeah, you pretend you're not paying attention, but I tell you what, you're clicking the internet every day until that one ticks over and you see what it actually sold for. Yeah. Because that's your greatest your greatest bragging rights, or you're going to go under a rock for the next 6 months and never tell anyone what you did. But it is valuers should be getting close to each other. If they're not, it's worth asking what the difference is. And if they haven't both included the same evidence, why haven't you included that evidence? They might have overlooked it, or they may have been in a rush doing those other 9 valuations.
And it's probably got easier to be evidence-based because of the proliferation and the ability for data matching these days. Another example I would say would be, I did a reno on a place up on the Central Coast. This is probably 10 years ago. And I did a big reno, wanted to get it refinanced and pull some money out to keep investing. And I had a valuer come in. I can't remember who the bank was, but it was a bank mandated valuer come in. It was on Christmas Eve, the 24th of December, at about 11 o'clock. And the valuer come in and the valuation report come back and went, that's not right. No ways. I left it until I think early February, got it revalued. And all I did was clean some of the paint spills up and
mow the lawn.
Just mow the really, really small. Got put some bark in the garden and whatnot, right? And the valuation come in is what I thought it would be, which by memory was about $60,000 or $70,000, which based on the actual valuation was a significant amount. So to the point, value as a human, like this value's come through, wanted to be home for Christmas Eve and just gone, oh, that's what it is. But it was a different value and I think with a different bank. So these things do change. What's the hardest type of property value and why, Gareth? Unique ones probably?
Unique properties. Development sites are very challenging when I value those. One of the interesting things, and I do have a lot of respect for property developers, is you can look at all the characteristics of a property and you can, as I said, you can do the perfect job of valuing that property based on what you believe you can get out of it, and yet the developer will pay 10% more for the block of land. You go, why would you even do that? But then they have their skills and their connections and their experience, and they get another 2 floors on it. So there's the value to them. So they're very difficult to value. They're interesting and challenging, and I do enjoy doing it. But to value them to get what someone's going to pay for them, it's really near on impossible because they just do. You can't put a fudge in your valuation. You go, oh yeah, and because the developer's going to buy it, therefore we'll just put another 10% on it. You can't quantify that with anything. So it's when you have difficulty quantifying things that makes it hard. I enjoy valuing all sorts of property. I enjoy valuing residential property because I touched on it before. There's always a person. I enjoy talking to people. So every house has a person in it. They've all got a story to tell, and there's some real crackers I can tell you over a beer, maybe offline. Yeah. Industrial property is good because it becomes very formulaic. It's interesting getting the evidence for that. It's a bit more of a challenge getting evidence. It's not as easy as just looking up on real commercial. You've got to dig a bit deeper. And commercial property, they can have very different leases on those sort of properties. So there's a lot of research, and you're always learning doing those sort of things. But they come with a great deal of challenge. So they take a lot more time. They're more expensive to value because you've got to put a lot more time, and there's a bit more risk involved in them. But all properties are interesting. The only difficult ones in residential are when you're getting into really prestige properties. It is difficult to find. If a property is sold off market, for example, there won't be any internal photographs of that property on realestate.com because it's never been advertised. So why did someone pay $70 million for that one and only $60 million for the same size one 2 doors down? It's hard to tell. So you've got to build a relationship with the selling agent and talk to them and get that sort of information.
Cool. Well, Gareth, mate, we're going to have to get you back in. We've run out of time.
No worries, Phil.
And you touched on a couple of points there why you should get an independent valuation. They can actually help you through the process of scoping out a development, as well as, you can really help it with capital gains tax. You can get valuations backdated, but superannuation, obviously, in SMSF requires valuation for audit. So this is important. We'll get into it. But Gareth, thanks. If people want to track you down, do they just search Augmen Consulting or something?
Augmen.com.au.
Okay, there you go. Eva, thanks for bringing Gareth along. It's nice to reconnect with him. He did a valuation for me some time ago, but the valuation component is often the forgotten part of property investment, but it is absolutely critical. And I would imagine, Gareth, with the buyer's agency work that you do, which we'll have a chat about at some point in time, knowing how to value is probably a really good skill set as part of it, right?
It does give my clients a bit more confidence.
Yeah, it does. All right, nice one. Thanks, gang. Thanks for tuning in and joining us for this conversation around valuation. Remember to check out smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. Smart Property HQ is where you find us on social media. We'll see you again next time. Until then, bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property, or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.
Feeling trapped by rising interest payments? Escape from mortgage prison with expert refinancing assistance from Finni. We have helped hundreds of borrowers break free from higher loan repayments by finding a more suitable loan. Our expert team can quickly assess your situation, and if there's a better lender available, we'll find it fast. Don't delay. Call today. Speak to a Finni mortgage specialist on 02 8866 2444 or visit our website at www.finni.com.au.